What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
Every year, my family gathers for what they call the portrait, and every year I tell myself I will not care this time. I will not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. And then I watch the photos pop up anyway with the same neat smiles and the same edited version of reality where I do not exist, and I feel that old sting rise up like it always does. Because it is not about a picture so much as it is about the story they want to sell about themselves. A story where I am the extra who wandered out of frame and never got called back. I found out this year the way I always do, not with a text or a call or a quick heads up, but with a tagged album that my cousin posted and my mother immediately commented on with the same line she uses every year about blessed family and tradition, and how grateful she is to see everyone together, which would be almost funny if it were not so tired. Because I am from that family and I live in the same city and my phone works, and if they wanted me there, they could have told me the date like they told everyone else. I stared at the photo longer than I should have, and I recognized the poses that were copied from past years because they cling to sameness like it is proof of goodness. My brother on the end because he is tall, my sister in the middle because she likes control. My mother angled toward the camera with her head tilted in that way she thinks reads gentle, and in the center there was a gap where I used to stand when I was still getting invited. A space they filled with a rug and a toddler and a dog, and the idea that I was always too busy anyway, which is their favorite story to tell about me when what they really mean is that I am too independent to nod along and keep quiet. I scrolled the comments and I saw the same people saying what a beautiful family, and I felt something sour go down because even though I know those people are just being polite, it still hits the part of me that is tired of pretending an open door exists where there is a brick wall, and I know how the next 48 hours will go. With the relatives texting one another about how I am sensitive and dramatic and always making things about myself, because they love that script, and because it saves them from saying the simple truth out loud, which is that they did not forget me, they left me out on purpose. I put my phone down and tried the grown-up thing, the deep breath thing, the I am above this thing, and it lasted maybe 5 minutes before the old memories started lining up like a parade. The time I showed up and got told there was no room in the frame. The time I was asked to hold purses while they adjusted themselves. The time my mother joked that retouching could not fix everything and then looked at me to see if I would laugh along, and I did, because when you are younger you do not realize that laughing at a dig does not make you part of the group. It just gives them permission to do it again next year. What gets me is how ordinary their reasons always sound, and how clean it makes the mess look. Phrases like scheduling is hard, or you were traveling, or we thought you said you were swamped, and it is all very tidy and reasonable until you look at the pattern. Because the pattern is the truth, and the truth is they prefer the set where everyone plays a role they signed off on, and my role never tested well with their audience. I could tell you I am fine, that I have my own life with work that makes me proud and friends who call me on hard days and a therapist who would very much like me to stop checking my mother's posts, and all of that is true. Yet the ache still shows up because there is something strange about being erased by the people who gave you your name and your face and your terrible sense of humor, and it does not matter how many wins you stack, there is always the one room you cannot enter without someone subtly moving your chair. I made a cup of coffee I did not need and told myself to focus on the week ahead, and I failed at that too because my mind kept circling back to the same sentence, which started as a joke in my head and then came out sounding like a dare. The thought that if they refuse to put me in their picture, then maybe I should put myself somewhere they cannot miss, somewhere so public and obnoxious that even my mother's church friends would have to pretend they were not looking while they definitely were. I know how this sounds, and I know you might be thinking this is petty or high school, and maybe it is, and maybe I am allowed one petty thing after years of being told to be the bigger person while standing outside the door. And I am not trying to fix the family or heal childhood wounds in one dramatic gesture, because I do not believe in that. I just want one clean strike of my own, one move that says I see your perfectly edited portrait and I raise you something louder. And if that makes me the problem, then fine. I will be the problem with a plan. I opened my laptop and typed a phrase into a search bar that I have never typed before, and I followed the link that looked the most legitimate, and I clicked through a set of options that read almost like a menu. And when I reached the part with prices and packages and lead times, I felt a rush I have not felt in years. The rush of deciding my own story without asking anyone for permission. I did not tell a soul, not a friend, not a coworker, and especially not my mother, and I entered my card and put down a deposit that made my hands shake a little, and I scheduled a call for the next morning with someone who could help me make this idea real, because if they do not want me in their frame, then they can learn what it feels like when the frame belongs to me, and the city is the living room, and the only rule is that no one gets to look away. The call with my mother started the way these calls always start, with a bright voice and an undertone that tells you the real conversation is happening somewhere else, and when I asked, very calmly and very directly, whether there had been a plan for the portrait this year and whether maybe a text went missing or a date did not make it onto my calendar, she laughed that light laugh she uses instead of an answer and said I am always juggling so many things and she worries about adding to my plate, which is the kind of sentence that sounds generous until you hear what it actually means, and what it means is that she prefers to make choices for me and then pretend those choices are favors. I stayed on the line longer than I should have and let her go through the familiar routine where she blames the photographer for scheduling issues and blames my work for being demanding and blames traffic for making it hard to coordinate. And I listened while thinking about all the times I have been told to be fair and give people the benefit of the doubt, and how the benefit of the doubt becomes a very expensive habit when the same people cash it every single year. I asked her one more time a yes or no question about whether they had already done the portrait, and she said it was more of a soft plan, and they were thinking of late next week or maybe the week after. Which would have been a neat save if my cousin had not posted the album at dawn with the location tag still on, and I heard my own voice lose the friendly shape as I said that I saw the photos and that the discussion we were having was not about logistics. It was about honesty, and she shifted to the move where she says I am being harsh and she wishes I would not push everything into corners, and then she said she had to jump because my sister had arrived with the kids. And that was the part where I said sure and hung up and looked at the wall and thought about how many years I have spent asking these people to tell me the truth in a way that feels comfortable to them. After I set the phone down, I did the thing I promised myself I would not do, which was to scroll through the comments again and count the people who knew exactly what they were doing by tagging me in unrelated threads to make sure I would see it. A small social nudge dressed as civility, and I felt the anger settle into something colder and sharper than I am used to. Not a tantrum and not a plea, more like a decision I had already made that was waiting for me to say it out loud. I called the studio under my full name and gave them my number, and when the receptionist asked how she could help, I said I was calling to confirm a detail for my family session because I needed to plan around it. And there was a pause that told me she was looking at a screen with information she was not sure she should share, and then she said that as a courtesy she could tell me that the session took place 2 days ago and that retouching was in progress, and I said thank you and I hope. They all smiled big. And I hung up and laughed without humor because somehow hearing it from a stranger felt cleaner than listening to my mother fold herself into an alibi. I could have confronted them again. I could have sent a long message or written a careful email that tried to balance dignity and fury like I have done for years. But instead I opened my laptop to the tab I had left open and clicked the button that said proceed. And a window popped up for artwork specifications and placement options and route selections. And as I read through the choices, I realized that this was the first time in a long time I was building something that did not require anyone else's approval. Not a sibling's nod and not a parent's blessing, just a contract and a card and a willingness to carry the consequence. The account manager called me within the hour and asked me what I was trying to achieve so they could advise me on placement, and I said with absolute clarity that I wanted saturation, I wanted frequency, and I wanted guaranteed passes through 3 corridors that matter to me for reasons I did not explain: the route by my mother's commute, the loop by the church she loves to tag, and the street that runs in front of the studio. And the manager went quiet for a beat and then said that was doable, and that the earliest run could happen in about a week if I moved fast on approvals, and I told her I could move fast because I have had years of practice waiting, and I did not intend to wait another minute. She asked what I wanted the wrap to say because copy makes or breaks an ad, And I sat there with the cursor blinking like a dare and felt every old bruise line up into one sentence, and I gave it to her clean. The line that had been running like a ticker in my head since the album went live. The line that would sound like a joke to anyone who did not know the context and like a punch to anyone who did, and when she repeated it back to me and asked if I was sure, I said I was more than sure, and she said it would work. We went through the approvals and the payment and the image license and the delivery schedule, and when she asked if I wanted a launch photo for my records, I said yes, because there is a part of me that will frame it in my kitchen not as a trophy, but as proof that I can decide to stop waiting for permission and then actually stop. Before I closed my laptop, I did one last thing that would make some people call me petty and others call me brave, and maybe both are true. Because I found the studio's online booking page, and I booked the 30 minutes immediately after their usual slot for next year under my real name with a note that said solo portrait, and I paid the deposit and marked the date on my calendar with a private smile. Because if they insist on writing me out of their story, then I will write my own sequel, and I will not ask them to be in it. And as soon as the confirmation email hit my inbox, I forwarded it to my mother with a single line that read, I figured I would make scheduling easier for everyone, which was not the blow-up they expect from me, and not the apology they prefer. But it was the first clean hit I have landed in a long time, and it felt like the start of something I could finally finish. The funny part, if you can call it that, is how predictable the script becomes once you know your family's lines by heart, and when I tried one more time to bring it up. Not in a dramatic way, but just casually with my sister during a call, she only answered because she wanted to borrow a recipe. She slipped straight into her role and said she thought I had already explained how sensitive I am and how I always find a way to twist something harmless into an attack, which is the exact sentence she used 2 years ago when I asked why my name was missing from the Christmas card list, and the exact sentence she used the year before that when I said maybe I should at least be asked whether I was available instead of just being erased. I listened as she went on about how exhausting it is when one person insists on making everything about them, and I let her finish, because I have learned that when they get on that track they are not speaking to me, they are performing for themselves, soothing their own conscience by repeating the same lines until they believe them, and when I finally said I just wanted to know why no one thought I deserved to be there, she let out a long sigh and told me I was impossible, and then she said she had to go because her kids needed her. And the line went dead before I could remind her that her kids are going to learn very quickly who gets counted and who does not. I sat with the silence for a long time and realized that there was no version of this where words would fix it. No amount of calls or texts or careful reasoning would suddenly make them see me, because they did not fail to notice me, they worked to erase me. And you cannot argue someone into pretending they have not already made their choice. That is when the idea that had been brewing at the edges of my mind began to sharpen. The thought that maybe I had spent too many years playing by their rules, waiting for them to hand me scraps of recognition, when the truth is that I could make my own rules and make them so big that no one could look away. I thought about how often my family clings to appearances, how they live for perception and for what neighbors and church friends and old coworkers will think when they see their curated image, and it hit me that the very thing they weaponize could be turned against them. That if the portrait is their crown jewel, then I could build a crown 10 times taller and brighter, and no one could take that from me because it would not be theirs to control. That was when I stopped venting to my friends about how unfair it was, because friends are good for sympathy, but sympathy is a soft blanket, and what I needed was armor. I pulled back, kept quiet, and started planning. It was almost liberating to not try to explain myself anymore, to stop hoping someone would validate my hurt, because once I let go of that, the space opened up for something bigger. And I found myself sketching ideas on scraps of paper while pretending to take notes at work meetings, laughing quietly at the audacity of what I was about to do, and realizing that for the first time in years the power was in my hands. I thought about the caption for days, trying out versions that sounded clever but not sharp enough, until the exact line settled into place like it had been waiting for me all along. A line that sounded breezy on the surface, but carried enough bite that the people who knew would choke on it, and once I heard it in my head I could not unhear it. I knew my family would never admit what they had done. They would spin it the way they always do, saying I was too busy or too independent or too difficult, and I knew if I confronted them directly it would just give them another round of lines to recite. But I also knew there was no script in the world that could explain away a city bus carrying my face across town with a message they could never control, and that realization gave me a kind of calm I had not felt in years. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head. I stopped drafting imaginary comebacks for my sister's comments, and instead I pictured my mother in her car at a stoplight staring at my face larger than life, and my brother scrolling through group texts trying to decide whether to laugh or complain, and my cousins having to explain to their friends why the sibling who was never invited suddenly looked like the one who owned the whole damn stage. When I went to bed that night, I did not fall asleep right away. But the restless energy I felt was not the kind that eats at you. It was the kind that drives you forward, the kind that whispers this is going to happen and there is nothing they can do about it. I had spent years asking nicely, years trying to wedge myself into a space that had already been closed off to me, and I was done with that version of myself. If they did not want me in their frame, then fine. I would build a frame they could never escape, and I would not ask their permission or their forgiveness. Because after all these years, I finally understood that the only way to win with people who thrive on erasure is to make yourself undeniable, and that was exactly what I was about to do. When the account manager sent over the mock-ups, I felt the kind of steadiness I used to envy in other people, the calm that shows up when you stop arguing about whether you deserve a seat and instead build your own table. And as we went back and forth on the placement and the copy and the scale, I noticed how quickly the second-guessing faded once I realized there was no committee to convince and no sibling to appease. There was just me and a contract and the knowledge that if I wanted saturation, then I would need to be specific, so I asked for the loop that cuts past the studio at predictable intervals, the corridor that runs along my mother's commute where she likes to leave early and beat traffic, and the weekend line that idles near the church where the polite crowd smiles a lot while collecting stories to pass around later. And when the manager paused and said that could be arranged with a little juggling, I said I was fine with juggling because I have been a contortionist in that family for years and I was ready to see someone else bend for a change. We argued briefly about the caption length because ad people love balance and I love clarity, and in the end she admitted the line worked because it sounded like a lifestyle boast on the surface while carrying a blade underneath for anyone who knew the backstory. And I approved the type, approved the crop, approved the route, and signed the final proof with a satisfaction I did not try to hide because there was nothing left to pretend about, not for them and not for me. The image choice surprised me a little because I did not pick anything glamorous or softened. I picked a straight look that says I am here and I am not asking, and when the photographer who licensed the shot asked if I wanted retouching, I said minimal to none and meant it. Not because I wanted to send a message about authenticity to the world, but because I wanted to send a message to myself that I was done asking to be softened, so that I would fit into rooms that crush anything with an edge. And he laughed and said that was unusual for advertising, and I said unusual has been my lane for a long time. I kept the entire project quiet, not from fear that someone would sabotage it, though that would not be out of character, but because secrecy gave me control, and control is what they always took first. So I told no one besides the account manager and the printer and the driver coordinator who confirmed launch windows and turn times with the precision of a train schedule, and as those emails stacked up, I felt the old habit of dreaming up fair responses from my family finally loosen its grip, because I no longer needed an apology or an explanation to make sense of what had happened. I needed the rollout to be clean and loud and impossible to ignore, and everything else could stay silent. There was a moment where I almost softened the plan, a brief flicker of worry about whether this would escalate things beyond repair, and then I remembered how many years I had repaired myself after being pushed out and laughed at for wanting the bare minimum. And I realized that worrying about their comfort at this stage would be one more way of agreeing to disappear, so I doubled down instead and added a small twist that pleased me more than I expected, a tiny line of text on the lower corner. that no one outside the family would parse as anything but a tagline, a two-word echo that answers their favorite excuse about me being too occupied to show up. And when I signed off on that final version, I felt the click of a door closing in the best possible way. I set an alarm for the morning the first bus would leave the depot, and I mapped the route where it would pass the studio at a time when the staff usually steps outside to take a break, and I sent myself a calendar hold named after next year's solo session just because the symmetry made me grin, and then I set my phone face down and stopped refreshing. Because the thing was real now and there was nothing to do but let it move through the city like a message in a language my family understands better than any heartfelt conversation. To keep my nerves from chewing through the night, I did something almost comically practical, which was to write out a list of contingencies that I would never need. Backup copy in case a printer jammed. Alternate passes if a route change delayed the reveal near the studio. A second contact at the transit company who could confirm a reroute if construction popped up without warning. And while none of that drama arrived, the act of preparing steadied me in a way therapy talks about but rarely delivers on its own, because the difference now was that my preparation was for my benefit, not for theirs. The account manager sent me the final confirmation just before I went to bed. A short note saying the wraps were installed and the bus numbers were in motion, and I lay there thinking about how they will try to spin this when it hits them. How my mother will pretend to be worried about my mental health because that line has worked on her friends before. How my sister will call it attention seeking because heaven forbid someone else take the spotlight for 5 minutes. How my brother will text the group with a joke and then go quiet when he realizes no one is laughing, and instead of feeling dread, I felt a kind of quiet joy. The joy of finally getting to choose the ending of a scene that has been written over me for years. I woke before the alarm because anticipation does that, and I drove to the corner near the studio with coffee I did not drink, and as the light changed and the first bus turned into the block with my face carrying the message I chose, I watched the studio door open and a staffer step outside at the exact time I had predicted, and I heard the faint buzz of a phone somewhere inside the building, and I knew without a doubt that by the time the bus reached the next stop, the people who love their perfect portrait would be staring at a frame they could not crop, and that was the last clean breath before the noise began. When the first photos started circulating from people who did not know the backstory and just liked the sound of the caption, I kept quiet and let the city do the talking, because the point was never to make a speech or drag anyone online. The point was to place something undeniable in the path of people who have trained themselves to deny me, and it worked faster than I expected, with coworkers sending me laughing messages that carried more pride than mockery and old friends from school asking whether the line was a joke or a brand launch, which made me smile because the only brand I was launching was the version of myself that no longer waits by the door holding a casserole and a forced grin while everyone else takes their place on the risers. I did not tag the bus or post a selfie or write a long caption about growth and boundaries. I just went to work and answered emails and watched from a distance as the loop I had chosen did exactly what it was supposed to do, which was to pass the studio twice before lunch, idle near the church after service, and roll down my mother's commute right as she usually beats the clock, and even though I was not there to see her face, I did not need to be. Because my phone lit up with the kind of messages that always arrive when appearances are threatened and the script has not been rehearsed. My sister called first with the tight tone she reserves for customer service agents and family, asking me what on earth I thought I was doing and whether I had considered how this would look for our parents. And I said that if optics are the problem, then optics can also be the solution, and that maybe it was time they sat with a little discomfort since I have been hosting the whole meal for years. And she said I was being cruel and attention-seeking and ridiculous. And I said I understood that. It felt that way from her seat in the center of the frame, but from my seat on the curb, this was the first thing that had ever felt proportionate. My mother tried a different door, the one with concern and soft words about stress and mental health and how sometimes success can make people act out, and I let her finish, because I know how much she loves a gentle performance. And then I told her in a voice so steady it surprised me that there had been so many chances to tell a small truth in that none of them were taken, and that the bus was not about humiliation or revenge in the way she wanted to paint it. It was a notice served to a tradition that had become a habit of erasure. and that I would not be arguing about whether I was invited or whether someone forgot, because the receptionist at the studio had already solved that mystery for me with a timestamp and a quiet apology. She asked me to take it down as if such a thing were a switch I could flip, and I said the contract was paid for a run that would last 2 weeks and that the copy was clean and the placement was legal, and that I would not be asking a company to cancel a service, because a family could not say the word sorry without choking on it. The studio owner called as well, polite and nervous, explaining that a few clients had mentioned the bus and asking whether there might be a way to reroute the loop to avoid their block during pickup hours. And I told him I respected his business and that I had chosen a public route for a reason that did not involve him personally, and that I was not asking for anything beyond what any advertiser receives. And he exhaled and offered me a discount on a future session as a gesture of goodwill, which made me laugh quietly because I told him the slot was already booked under my name for next year and that the rate had been paid in advance, and he said he admired my efficiency and wished me a good day, and I believed he meant it. I refused to post anything public because silence became part of the design, and when relatives tried to triangulate me through group chats by tagging me in recipes and dog photos like a peace offering with strings attached, I replied with one message that contained the line they have avoided for years, the line that said you did not forget, you made a choice, and I am done pretending otherwise, and then I left the chat and turned off notifications, not because I was angry in that moment, but because I was finished. What I did not expect was the voicemail from my father that arrived late in the evening, a long pause followed by a short sentence where he said he saw the bus and that he understood more than I thought, and that he was not sure what to say except that maybe the picture did look a little empty, and then the recording cut off as if he needed the courage of another call that never came, and I sat with that sound for a while, not because I was ready to forgive, but because it is hard to hear a crack form in a wall you built to keep yourself safe, and part of me wanted to pick up and push for the apology that might finally be within reach, while another part of me knew that the smartest thing I could do was to let the silence work. Because for once it was working for me. An aunt texted privately to say she always thought the tradition needed updating and that she hoped I would not disappear, and I wrote back that I was not the one who disappears. I am the one who is not invited, and that distinction matters, and she answered with a heart that I accepted without judgment, because acceptance without judgment is what I have been asking for all along. On the last morning of the run, I stood at a stop 2 blocks from the studio and watched my own face glide by for the final pass, and I felt no urge to grin or pose or record it. I just felt the simple relief that comes when you make a move that cannot be spun into a misunderstanding, and then I walked to the coffee shop and opened the confirmation for my solo portrait, which now felt less like a backup plan and more like a tradition I could live with, a calendar event that belongs to me and no one else. I do not know whether my family will invite me next year, and I do not plan to ask, because the part of me that cared about the portrait has not died so much as it has found a different camera, and that camera is mine, and the frame is mine, and the story is mine, and if someone wants to step into it, they can learn the new rules, which start with simple honesty and end with mutual respect, and if that is too much for people who like the safety of a cropped picture, then they can keep their canvas and their captions, and I will keep the city, because this was never about going too far, it was about finally going far enough to turn around and see that I am not the one left out anymore, they are. And I am perfectly fine with that being the headline that follows me home.